pass it over to Anna.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on this beautiful day. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here in front of your computers for the Speculation Desk, introducing the Shock Value Fellowship. We're really excited to host our special guests and speakers today. I'll pass proceedings over to Marie-Sophie Bonville in a minute, just to contextualize the event and introduce everybody who's here. But first, just a couple of words for those of you unfamiliar with us. Concordia University's fourth space is located in downtown Tiohtià:ke or Montreal on unceded Indigenous land. We are a university-wide platform focused on working collaboratively with our community across the disciplines to activate research, teaching, and initiative via all sorts of process-based exploration. So we're really pleased to take part in this event, especially because it's in progress. That's great. We are currently recording, so I'll pop the link to where the video will live into the chat in a minute. And we're also live streaming at CU Space for those of you on Facebook. We hit the ground running here today, so if anyone has issue with that live stream, just reach out to Douglas from Space into the chat and we'll address your concern, no worries. As a public space, we do encourage open dialogue and discussion, and therefore the decision to run this event as an open meeting as opposed to a webinar was taken with our collaborators to ensure that you benefit from all of the ways our distanced virtual interaction allows for. So please do feel free to turn on your videos and participate using audio and text if you want to jump in with some questions after each little presentation. And at the end, there'll be plenty of time for a question period. So please do feel free to simply speak. If you're more of a texter, no worries. That's what the chat is there for. Okay, on that note, I'll pass things over to you, Marie-Sophie. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. We're so pleased that you're here. We can believe that with this hard contest with the sun, we somehow won. So we are very pleased for all of you to, take the time to be here today to the first 2021 edition of the office hours. For those of you who don't know, office hours are those kind of conference, webinars, and formal chats that the Office of Rules and Norms holds every once in a while. Again, for those of you who don't know, the Office of Rules and Norms is a studio headquartered in the Faculty of Fine Arts at Concordia, where we explore regulations, the rule of law, market standard, cultural norms as kind of new mediums for art-based practices. Basically, rules and norms kind of rule the world. They're everywhere. They form the fabric of our society, but they're quite difficult to grasp, somehow invisible at times, but they have this very major effect on the way we live our daily lives. So the point of the studio is to make those rules and norms visible so that they can be, first of all, well, made visible, be explained, be questioned, and then even subverted. So the Office of Rules and Norms has a couple of branches that are blooming at the moment, and one of them is the Antispeculation Desk. So what do we want to do today? I'm going to provide a big background on what is the Antispeculation Desk, the activities we did last year that led to the formation of the Shock Value Fellowship this year. So I'm going to do a brief background. After that, our 4 fellows, Shock Value fellows, are going to present their early work, preliminary thinking around the projects they want to do this year. And then the goal is really to have a discussion with everyone present here, kind of brainstorming mode. Everything is kind of open in terms of bouncing ideas on what will be presented by the fellow. So a bit of background, the Speculation Desk was created, the Anti-Speculation Desk was created last year to dive a bit deeper into the housing crisis and the deeper systems that produce growingly unaffordable cities. So last year, I had quite the privilege of designing this inaugural seminar that was called Access in the City. And we had amazing students ranging from, I think there were people from 15 departments, fine arts, non-fine arts, ranging from BA all the way to PhD. So it was quite a diverse group of students. And by the way, the work they produced, the pandemic hit, as you all know, right in the middle of that semester, but we were able to collect the amazing and deep thinking that happened during the seminar, and all of the projects are now live on the ORN website. So that's a big primaire here. So if you go on orn.studio, you will be able to see all of the projects from the Access in the City alumni from the 2020 edition. So basically, when I designed this seminar last year, I identified, based on my own research and my own professional practice as a practitioner in community-driven social housing, community land trust types of housing models. And I identified 5 systems that were, according to me at that time, the kind of main systems that explain real estate speculation. So there was private property, residential capitalism, fiscal urbanism, the real estate, the structure of the real estate industry, and then foreign, quote unquote, investment. And when the students, you know, started to interact with this material and produce their own work in interaction with this material, something very interesting happened. I was trying to, you know, understand the type of patterns that were emerging from the student projects, and one whole other system kind of emerged. And it was like, this is so, this is where the beauty for me happens of, you know, having artists explore such kind of unusual topics, because one of those systems was this notion of value. It's quite, you know, fundamental. It's quite basic in a way. And it was a kind of necessary step back, being like, okay, all of these things might explain why, you know, prices keep going up, but what is this weird notion of value anyway? How do we quantify the earth, and why do we do it through an understanding of value that is pretty narrow, which is based on financial value? So 4 of those students have now become the shock value fellows. So 4 of the students that really, in my opinion, did some incredible work around this notion of value, agreed to form the Shock Value Fellowship this year and to dive deeper into the projects they proposed last year and work together and bring them on a whole different level this time around. So I'm gonna let them introduce to you the very exciting projects they're working on, but just quickly, they're thinking about models models for value that basically go beyond this notion of financial value, and they're thinking about ways to propose and build rent-free housing models, basically through art-based interventions. So without further ado, I'm going to present them very quickly, and I'm going to leave them the floor after that for them to present their work. So, okay. By the way, my brain goes in a really weird space when I have to say numbers in English, and somehow they know that, and they decided to put a lot of numbers in their bios. So please be very understanding with me as I go through this very humbling experience. So Gabriel Townsend-Dario has a BA in urban studies from Concordia. He works in community-driven real estate and is pursuing a certificate in real estate studies at UQAM at the moment. He rents a 4.5 for $815 a month on a 535 square meter property worth $1.9 million. Maddie Capotz, our second fellow, holds a BFA in design from Concordia. She has explored her creativity in settings ranging from a social innovation hub, an arts-based transdisciplinary studio, a reuse center, and a research lab for sustainable urbanism. She rents a 4.5 for $1,260 a month on a 185 square meter property worth $1.2 million. Christine White, our third fellow, is completing her bachelor's degree at Concordia University with a major in intermedia and a minor in sociology. Combining research with interventions, she uses mobile disruptive architecture to imagine public space that acts to serve the common good rather than corporate interest. And she rents a 3.5 for $500 a month on a 1,000 square meter property worth $2.3 million. And finally, Thomas Enrich holds a BFA in design at Concordia University. And throughout his degree, he has worked on various subjects, including the modernization of Montreal in the 60s, the reuse of large infrastructure materials, and social ecological architecture. And he currently rents a 6.5 for $1,550 a month on a 153 square meters property worth $144,000. I did it. Now it's your turn. So they're gonna present for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're gonna open the floor to discussion. Thanks, Fanny.
Great. Thanks, Marie-Sophie, for that glowing introduction. I'm going to share, the four of us have prepared a presentation, a set of slides for you today. So I'm going to share that and present to you. Are you seeing the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Seems good. So the Shock Value Fellowship, what is it? The fellowship is the four of us, as Marie-Sophie explained. And the project, we each worked on our own individual projects in the course last year, but we're coming together and bringing these projects together and trying to find a thread that leads them all together in the hopes of revealing and critiquing the dominance of financial mechanisms in real estate development. And we're trying to experiment also with non-financial forms of value. So taking after the Office of Rules and Norms, the method is to use art as a tool for subversion and subversion as a tool for research. So the notion of value here is used as a support beam for us to enact public interventions around the city with our four projects. The interventions attempt to engage a wider public in challenging financialized conceptions of land and to speculate on the development of new value frameworks and potentially provide grounds for the eventual de-commodification of land, no less. So 4 fellows, 4 projects, originally devised 1 year ago, without the opportunity to bring them to life last spring and summer. So now we're doing so. And we're looking also for the emergence of something beyond the 4 projects alone. So I'll pass this on to Thomas. Were you going to do the second slide?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So as Gabriel briefly mentioned, in this fellowship, we're going to be addressing, yes, the theme of value, but more specifically, how value is created. How specifically financial value is created. And that'll allow us to speculate on how we can devise and give meaning to other forms of value. And finally, we'll be looking at the financialization of land and what that entails. Through this process, we'll be conducting, and we have conducted research, as well as public interventions, which will be enacted in this spring and early summer through methods of strategic design and with a hint of subversion. So we're asking multiple questions in these interventions, and we will see what answers emerge. So we're going to start off with the project that I conceived in the Access in the City class. This project serves to set the stage for this fellowship to analyze kind of the current context of real estate in Montreal and perhaps hint at or help understand why it's developing the way that it is developing. So this project is based on a research process, and then, like I said earlier, will result in an urban intervention, and specifically looks at the Maestria condominiums project in downtown Montreal at Place des Arts. This project started off with me reflecting on what Marie-Sophie mentioned earlier about growing inaccessibility to housing that is illustrated through, or at least for pre-pandemic numbers, record low vacancy rates. And with that knowledge in mind, I mean, I was learning about this material in the class and also observing in the city itself, just the number of real estate projects in the works as I was cycling to school or walking around, and going through various CMHC reports and different documents. There's the theme that kept coming up was that the reason there was such low vacancy rates and the reason why the market prices were being driven up was simply a question of growing demand. And so looking at the numbers, I realized by digging a bit that, or at least started asking the question why certain numbers weren't matching up. For instance, in this research, there indicated that there was a 1.5% vacancy rate in 2019, and that correlated at the same time to the creation of about 8,500 new housing units, whereas several years before, we were seeing 3.5 vacancy rates and much lower housing units being built. And so that made me wonder if perhaps there wasn't a flaw in this understanding of growing inaccessibility to housing as simply a question of demand and supply. So it made me wonder if maybe there wasn't a problem, not in as much in the way as in the fact that supply was being supplied, because clearly there were a lot of real estate projects going on, but rather in how it was being supplied and what were the mechanisms behind it that created a certain type of supply. And that type of supply seemed to be perfectly exemplified through a project like Maestria, which it doesn't take much research to understand that this isn't a project that will be widely accessible to your average Joe. So this project took the shape of tracking the creation of value through investment, especially through speculation of that property through time, and the financial processes that allowed for the creation of this mega project. And what emerged was that land was being primarily conceived as a financial mechanism. We have to remember that Maestria is created by a limited partnership society on which DeVimco is the promoter. And then we have the Fonds Solidarité FTQ, as well as Fiera Capital as investment funds who are backing up the project. And as a recent report mentioned and highlighted, is currently in Montreal, these mega real estate projects that are backed by investment funds produce a certain type of development. And that development is based uniquely to produce capital returns to be able to give back to shareholders that have shares in these investment funds. So this project was boiled down to the fact that major housing projects, such as Maestria residential projects, to be more specific, such as Maestria, such as various others in the city of Montreal, serve to generate capital and not necessarily to house people. And so as an intervention, something that could potentially happen, if we go to the next slide, Gabe, could be something like a public projection. So something that could display on these physical sites just exactly how much money is being invested into them, and how the land that is based on how that value is being exponentially heightened. And the point of this is to simply draw attention to how much return these investment funds and developers are aiming to make off of this land, and in one way, shape, or form, simply draw attention and bring the people to ask questions. And that's it for me.
Cool. Oh, sorry, I missed out on a little slide.
Oh yeah, right here. This is just a close-up of what it could look like.
Great. So we figured that we would start with enacting Thomas's project because it really sets the stage well for the rest of our projects. Christine and I are going to do ours around the month of June over the summer. So mine is called highest and best use. Why is that? Highest and best use is a principle in the world of real estate that a development project must always seek to make the most profitable use of the land. Considering legal permissibility, physical feasibility of the development project, financial feasibility, the development must maximize the value it generates relative to the value of the land it sits on. Briefly put, you don't buy $1 million piece of land downtown to build a shack on it. We all kind of understand this, unconsciously. It's the way the system works. Well, the proposition with this piece is to do exactly that, to build a shack on $1 billion piece of land, except that the shack is called the Pavilion. And the Pavilion is a light wooden structure, easy to disassemble and move as needed, and it's ambulatory. It scours the city and identifies plots of land on which to settle. What it seeks to do is raise the value of the properties it visits to their highest and best. Got to max it out. Any property in town, like say Saint-Denis, this vacant lot at Saint-Denis and Cherrier, or Mildura, why not? Or Maestria condominiums when it gets built. Like any building, the Pavilion is a value generation machine. It appears on the site overnight. During the day, people approach the structure, interact with it, and they're asked to leave their impressions in a guest book. The value generated here is sentimental in nature. It has to do with the guest's experience of the place. But emotional value, expressed in emotional terms like this, isn't very useful in a real estate context. So the guest's impressions are recorded and manipulated through various calculations to produce an estimate of the value generated in dollars. So, take Mildura, for example, one of the most valuable properties in Montreal. The Pavilion pays a visit. It does its work. It brings people into the space and allows them to have a new experience. And it brings Mildura just that much closer to its highest and best. Once it's done what it can, a request for reevaluation is sent to the municipal tax roll, because how could you let this value escape from the landlord's tax bill? And a bill is also sent to the property owner. So in essence, the piece asks, who decides what is highest and best? Is the market the best or only judge of value? Who is the market and what are its measures of value? Do alternative kinds of investment create value in a real estate economy? So this project will break ground in June, as well as Christine's. So I'll pass the mic to Christine.
Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, it's been fantastic to hear more about my collaborators' projects, and especially when I started to hear about Gabe's, I thought, hey, I think there's really something here for us to work together and do some intervention this summer. Not only because I just love doing intervention, but I think that the Pavilion could be a really great site to distribute what I have been working on, which follows a similar line as Gabe's, where basically statements of sounds and emotions of residents is a form that someone can fill out that asks them to consider what sounds are happening around them and to consider what emotions that brings up and to track them. So basically, just thinking about value concepts in that, what is it that makes
property valuable? Like, these were the sorts of things that I was really curious about. I think it was specifically physical urbanism was the topic that Marie-Sophie introduced, that I just really started to be fascinated by this. I'm like, who's in charge of coming up with these numbers? How are these numbers generated? And yeah, like, is there a way to intervene on how that is, as well as what might be missing from these calculations? So especially too, with some of the things I've been learning about in sociology, have started to kind of blend in with my art practice. And so I got super interested in this idea of a form and tracking data. And so I grabbed hold of this particular form that you see in the background called the Statement of Income and Expenses of the Immovable. And I believe this is a form that a landlord would fill out. I'm not sure if it's annually. I actually can't remember how often this is filled out, but it's a way to just sort of contextualize what is on the property and how it's being used, which then determines the value of that property. And I just really wanted to dive into it to figure out, like, how does it work? So, you know, I go to some colors and I start color coding it, and you know, that in itself was just this fun exploratory process, which actually led to the development of that collage that you'll see as the image featured for this event, which I'm calling Internal Skylines. So I turned this form into this strange cityscape. And that was kind of just a part of my process. Like, I tend to be super process oriented. So through that exploration, it then led me to basically trying to imitate the format of this form, including like just down to little details like the font and even just how the title is. And so basically what I was trying to do was to think about how can we keep track of these qualities in a way that can create some kind of numbers. Basically, how do you take these qualities and turn them into numbers? And so it took a lot of thought process to try to figure out how would I ask people to keep track of these things. And it was a bit mind-boggling. I'm not sure if it's really possible in the end to keep track of these things and translate them. But that, I think, to me, is the interesting process, basically, that gets down to what I'm most interested in, which is, what do we consider valuable? And so if we are to be on, you know, this form is specific to someone's residence. So it was designed to be evaluated when you're at home. But say I were to, you know, have this be available at the Pavilion, then could it be a way to invite people to tune in to their surroundings and really consider what is it that makes a space valuable, and what kind of a city do we want to be living in? You know, I think that especially during the pandemic, when the construction all stopped for a moment, I felt like I could finally sleep, you know? And so I think that it's really interesting to think about how all these, like, it almost feels unfair, you know? And I'd like to just maybe put it out there to other people in the public to just get a sense of what kind of things do they tune into when they're experiencing sound around them, and how might that affect their emotions, to try to get to more the subtle nuances of our experiences in the city. And I guess the next few photos there is just trying to do a data visualization. I'm not sure if that's where it's going to lead to. There's a little book in the background with the heart around it. It's actually called Dear Data. And I took a lot of inspiration from that in terms of trying to figure out how to visualize whatever data I was collecting from people. And in fact, I gave instructions on how to do your own visualization. So I'm curious to see how this might come through in the interventions. I think for sure, just giving people an opportunity to assess sounds and emotions of the space, perhaps with the pavilion. But I'd be interested to hear what everyone thinks in terms of, if you came across the pavilion, how would you want to fill out a form? Like, what would inspire you to want to fill out a form like this? Would it be your own physical form, or maybe it needs to be a really huge printed form that's a communal form that gets consistently filled out from place to place? Who knows? That's what I'm just going to put out there, and I will pass it along to Maddie.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting a design proposal that I've been calling Realized Through Value Collective: Rent-Free Residencies as an Economic Instrument for Non-Financial Value Creation. And just to give context, so in the class, I originally conceptualized this project by writing a fictional news article where basically this institution existed already. And it kind of really helped me understand where it could go. So that was a fundamental part of my process, was that was how I started it. Basically, it's a proposed institution, Value Collective is a proposed institution that aims to support people who want to undertake work which is not profit motivated and doesn't generate financial returns, but which is nevertheless valuable work that benefits society at large. The idea then is to reframe these voluntary workers as economic actors whose work contributes to the economy, just not the financial one. So I'll just go over the 12 sort of key elements of the design proposal. So first, it offers rent-free living and working space. So rather than funding work directly, it gives the gift of time and space away from financial pressures, as well as non-financial forms of support, access to resources, and a unique experience with like-minded people. Minimized financial investment lowers the stakes to allow for maximal experimentation and autonomy for residents. This is achieved by funding the institution rather than individuals, which also serves to shift the focus away from each person's individual outcomes and onto the collective project. Residencies would take place over set time periods, 3, 6, 9 months a year, with options for renewal in the case of strong project momentum. Applications are proposal-based, but highly open-ended, meaning applicants can propose a residency on their own terms. Prospective residents are encouraged to apply with friends and enlist the help of their own networks. Proposals earn residencies on the basis of the values they promote, their collaborative potential, and the unlikelihood of the work being feasible outside the Value Collective model. Residents are invited to help develop and iterate Value Collective over time. So spatial arrangement, service offerings, operating governance structure. Living and working together facilitates relationship building between residents and the strengthening and expansion of networks. Event programming and publicly accessible spaces facilitates interaction between residents and the greater community. Value Collective would build in moments and provide tools to document and present efforts, progress, and successes, so all residents have a proof of concept that can be leveraged to support any desired continuation of work after the residency ends, which also works to satisfy donors of the project. And finally, work done in the context of this institution amasses esteem and legitimacy that it wouldn't otherwise have, and eventually achieves greater visibility and representation within economic discourse and policy. So to conclude, I'm kind of seeing this as having 4 layers in terms of the goals that could be actualized. So the first is maybe the most obvious. Value Collective would act as a means of realizing projects and efforts that are valuable for society, but which cannot or should not be realized through the market. Second, facilitating efforts undertaken within a unique shared context acts as a means of connecting non-financially motivated economic actors and creating opportunities for them to strengthen and build bonds with one another. So third, decentering finance as an economic motor and recentering relationships and human values acts as a means of diversifying the economy and creating resilience. And finally, investing in people and relationships through an institution acts as a means of imagining, articulating, and embodying more relational conceptions of life, work, and value. That's it.
So I might just jump in and just say that how we see the timeline going is that almost through with Thomas's research, kind of creating a sort of foundation for what we want to explore. Then by intervening on the city with Gabe and I, hopefully all of the continuation of our research can then also help inform Maddie's future vision plan. Maybe we can even make it come to life.
So thank you so much for this presentation. I already know your projects, but somehow they became even more alive when you presented them. And Gabe, I don't know if you should do like a Pavilion or just a full-on Netflix comedy special on, you know, real estate concepts, because
You Seinfeld in the Pavilion.
So yeah, as you can all see, I think the 4 projects kind of engage with this kind of playful subversion of this notion of value. And I would open the floor for, you know, if you want to discuss the teams that are explored, or, you know, the way you imagine, like recommendation or, you know, thinkings you might have about how to interact with the installations and the projects themselves, or further ideas. So I would invite you to put your name on the chat or raise your little hands on Zoom, and then I will allow maybe 2 or 3 interventions. The fellows will be able to bounce back on that, and then we can do a back and forth like that. So I see Nicolas Chevalier up here. So Nicolas,
Hello.
you can go ahead with your question. Hi.
Hey, that's cool. I know a few people here. That's nice. Hopefully meeting the others when we come back in person one day, maybe this fall. Just wanted to ask, wonderful projects. I know Christine and I'm a big fan of her imagination and work through reassigning media, if you will. But I was wondering, since this is a project out of Concordia, has there been any thought to putting this sort of subversive angle on the real estate department that is being developed out of the John Molson Business School? I myself was appalled to find out that this is going to be a minor and a major here in a city where, as you said, housing is at an all-time low and prices are just surging. So yeah.
Nice to see you too, Nick. I'm not familiar with this new development at Concordia. Could you just brief us on it?
Yeah, I put the link in the chat, and basically they're winding up this thing with the big words of real estate, which is how to take profit from it, how to, you know, benefit from industry and all this, which is all the buzzwords we're trying to avoid, what it sounds like with all your projects. And in lieu of that, I'll leave that for you to look at and possibly target, if you will. Should I say that on Zoom? I don't know. We'll see. But as for Madeline's project, which is super interesting, I'm also a fan of the solidarity economy and land trusts. And I wondered if some of these concepts came into sort of the thinking of how you would build this. And maybe, I don't know if anybody here has interacted with mutual aid networks across Montreal during the pandemic, and how the philosophy of that could influence people in reshaping how we think about places in the city.
So I have nobody else on the list yet. So if you want to bounce back on that now, Christine or Maddie or anybody else, feel free to do so and we'll get them going.
I guess I'll just say that I'm a really big fan of community land trusts. And if something like this were to be realized, I think a non-financial ownership model would be really key, because one thing to consider, which is especially relevant whenever you're talking about temporary projects, is who's ultimately capturing the value being created in a given space. So if all of these people were, say, working without financial compensation in a building, which was then becoming more and more valuable, especially due to their contributions, because one of the things I mentioned would be that people would ideally be able to be changing the space, adding to it, moving things around. If this was, say, like a privately owned building by like an individual, I think that would probably rub people the wrong way. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up.
Next, we have Claude.
Voilà. Bonjour. Hello. So I come from I have an unusual background that goes from architecture to visual arts to space sciences and ecology sciences, all that together. And I've been working with a few people on different proposals. One is a very large vertical farm in near my legs around there, Rosemont. It's on hold, but we had very interesting discussions. And also, what I realize is that there's a wide spectrum of real estate strategies right now. Montreal is, of course, a global target of investors. And one actually, Schiller-Lavie, for example, local boys, but they are financed by the Gazette said they are financed by Tel Aviv or Jerusalem billionaire, I forget where it was or his name, but so it's just with this sentence, the local becomes global internationalism. And your fellowship gives me the idea of doing something, fighting fire with fire. So I'm actually, I have a project to expropriate. So to ask a judge to expropriate a very large area of Montreal somewhere. I don't know where right now, there's many possibilities, to build a land trust, to turn it into a land trust. I'm also involved with Milton Park, which is a 50-year-old land trust. And there's many experiments there and modifications to the system right now. So one can study Milton Park and the recent history of Milton Park to see how utopia can take shape. And there's like a Milton Park 2.0, let's say, unfolding now. And so what I mean by a vertical farm is it's not aquaponics in a container. I'm talking about massive, very large grazed areas with like a real farm, but on floors, very high floors, which call them plates and not floors, 20 meters, 25 meters between plates. Therefore, you can have mature trees growing. You can have a forest if you prefer not having, les plantes maraîchères. So this study is actually, so far I work with scientists. I am one myself, and we think this is possible. So so it gives a vision of well, a futuristic vision or a retro-futuristic vision of Montreal, having such a structure. I'm talking about a structure, 200 to 300 meters high. So a very large structure, very large area, floor area, and very high. And this could be, of course, copied, 1,000 times if we need to. And this to liberate the St. Lawrence Valley of monoculture, to replant these areas of monoculture eventually into forests that they were before we cut the trees and planted wheat and so on. So
Claude, we have other questions coming up.
Yeah,
so
sorry. So I'm into this. You inspired me radicalism further, which it's always nearby, in my head. So okay, bye-bye.
But yeah, we can see all of these projects being connected to other initiatives already being happening in Montreal, and opening their own ground for new forms of intervention, while being cognizant of the fact that there are other projects going on. And I'm not sure if you mentioned the C40 competition component of your project, Maddie. If this is something maybe you might want to touch upon.
Well, yeah, I guess just a quick side note is that Gabe and Thomas and I have also been exploring a lot of these ideas and sort of like peripheral things related to urban development in the context of an upcoming design competition called C40. There's two categories in Montreal. There's the professional category, the student category. So we're looking at potentially proposing ideas building off of the concepts that these projects are touching on, and also including Value Collective as part of our proposal for C40 on, it's called the Faubourgs area. So basically where the Radio Canada building is and the old Molson Brewery, that whole area is set to be redeveloped. So we'll see how that goes.
So next up we have Sarah.
Sorry, I didn't have a question. I don't know.
Oh, sorry. Mistake on my end. So, oh, Gabrielle, you have a question?
Yeah, or just like I don't know, something.
Yeah,
yeah, what's cool about this project is, I mean, there's a lot of cool things about this project, but one of them is that we're kind of like proposing a gradient, like a perspective on value that's a gradient from like land value to like what is societal value. And it's like just Claude and Nicholas made me think of that kind of gradient, because like the whole thing about a vertical farm is that, I mean, I thought about it a lot. Probably a lot of people have been thinking about this during the pandemic, like looking downtown at the skyline and realizing that all these office buildings are vacant. Like maybe this space wasn't needed to begin with. Maybe it's true, like as Thomas is saying, that these buildings are so much more often just like a place to park capital rather than to do stuff or to contribute. People are totally allowed to not work at home. I think it's good to not work at home as well. Not throwing any shade on that. But it's a good question. I mean, like, why shouldn't we be using like prime real estate for agriculture, you know, in a way that makes sense, obviously, such as vertical farming. And then Nick brought up like mutual aid networks, which is like not about land at all, but the fact that we've had both of these topics raised in this discussion kind of, I think, speaks to like this kind of interesting, like all-encompassing or like multi-directional, like multi-possibilities aspect of this fellowship, which I find pretty cool.
And maybe just to bounce off that, something Marie-Sophie mentioned at the very beginning, and that I think is one of, if we're able to achieve this through this fellowship, it'll already be quite successful. I think if we get to get people to only like tune in to like the narrowness of the vision of value that is used to develop and build a city over time, as it is like and currently in a neoliberal context, such as in Montreal. I think that would be a success. Like I think one of the strong main arguments of this fellowship is, you know, on one end saying, well, look how currently the one bottom line, the one thing that matters in, you know, erecting these massive structures that have a toll on the environment, that have a social toll, that you know, are not, that you can't neglect. Essentially, their one main function is to provide financial returns, and then they're legitimized through one way or another, whether through like land tax as a value capture mechanism, or you know, quote unquote creating jobs or whatnot. But essentially their main purpose is to generate returns. And so I think if we can highlight that and bring people to think through Matt, Christine, and Gabriel's projects on how we could, it's strange to say, but like give value to other forms of value, and reflect on how those forms of value can have a bigger say in how a city is shaped and developed, that are not, where the bottom line is not financial value. I think, yeah, that would be, I would be very happy with that outcome.
I would love to jump off of that and just say that I think that's what makes this fellowship so well contextualized through the Office of Rules and Norms, because from what I'm hearing, Thomas, what you're describing is basically through our research and exploration, whether this be kind of communicated through some kind of artistic process, that through art we can engage with people to either question or reimagine these kinds of ideologies, specifically to value, and just how, if you look through history, the situation that we're in right now and all these sorts of financial mechanisms that exist are not very old if you think about humanity or even the entire planet. So it's like, why are we in this right now? And can we think and come up with ways to get out of it? I think that would be pretty great.
I don't know if
Yes, and
oh, sorry.
Well, maybe if you want, you know, a concluding thought from the fellows.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone had other comments or questions, but maybe a good concluding thought is something that, a word that came up a few times in our meetings in preparation for this fellowship was the term absurdity. And I think that in these reflections, you are always inevitably drawn to the realization of just the absurdity of this game, and how, you know, compared to historical forms of value, whether they're spiritual or even, basic, relating to basic needs, whether it's food or shelter, that currently our basic line, our bottom line for value is financial. There's a pretty clear form of absurdity in that, and maybe that would be a good concluding thought.
And wrapping up this session, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And I would maybe as a concluding comment, I really find each of your projects, one of the pillars of art is pedagogy. No, pedagogy. There's a weird accent somewhere. But yeah, I think the housing crisis affects a lot of people in their daily lives, and a growing number of people. And the fact that the mechanisms behind this crisis are so difficult to understand, for me, it adds a layer of dispossession and feeling a lack of ownership over our own lives. So I feel like projects like this one who take the time to just explain to people, the basic mechanisms that explains their daily life, that does not necessarily solve everything, but there is a part in that understanding and in that knowing that's very, very important in terms of like personal and collective dignity. So yeah, I really see projects like the ones you're doing really working towards a goal like this one. So that wraps up our discussion for today. If the notion of value intrigued you today and you want to dig deeper, next week, so March 31st, we're going to host a talk with Eric Bordelot, which is a researcher at Concordia, but also based in Berlin, financial researcher doing a lot of interesting project at the intersection of performance art, value, and blockchain technologies. I strongly encourage you to attend his talk called The Sphere. All the infos are on the Forward Space website. And for the final words, I'm going to send the mic back to you, Anna, if you want to wrap up the meeting.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm just actually looking for the link to pop it in the chat for the next event, and here it is. So thank you. I appreciate that. Obviously, I can't type and speak at the same time, but I just wanted to say thank you to Gabriel, Christine, Maddie, and Thomas, Marie-Sophie, and Sarah Brown, who's here as well, for well, first of all, for sharing your work with us, for this amazing, I guess, sounds like an amazing course that the Access in the City class and the projects that came out of it. We're so pleased to have this moment to speak with you, and your engagement in the conversation and the kind of question period was really wonderful to hear. So thank you for that. And Sarah and Marie-Sophie, we're so glad to collaborate with the Office of Rules and Norms with you once again and bring this to life. So on that note, just reminding folks that we have a recording of this session. If ever you want to share it with anybody, just look up Force Space Concordia on YouTube and you'll find us there. And I'll follow up with a link for all who registered. Okay, on that note, I guess let's get outside. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, bye everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.